Hello everybody, it's me, Fee, or Fiona Timms, otherwise known as White Zulu, author of my autobiography of the same name, and I welcome you all to another chapter of my book. I do hope you're all enjoying my life story, and I must thank all of you for being such dedicated subscribers, especially those who have written such complimentary comments below my videos. They are much appreciated. I would like to point out that the previous South African flag hanging on the wall behind me is not a political statement. It is simply a piece of history in the background of my first 50 years of my life, being born and growing up in my beloved mother country, South Africa. My autobiography, White Zulu, is not a political commentary, and frankly describes my experiences of growing up with the Zulu tribe as my family. That flag is simply a piece of cloth signifying the history of South Africa. It was originally used by the Union of South Africa from 1928 to 1961, and later the Republic of South Africa until 1994. Fred was looking for a job away from Oban, away from his mother. And we'd found that little croft, but there was no work there. So he had 2 interviews in the northern part of the Scottish Highlands, one at Loch Ness and one at Fort William. And we just got onto the ferry, as I described last week. So I pick up from there. We arrived in Fort William at 9 in the morning, just as the day began to get light, and had breakfast there. I sat in the warmth of the cafe, reading the Fort William Times, while Fred went out to the site offices nearby for his interview. He came back after an hour. "It looks like quite a good job, apparently," he said. "The big problem will be the accommodation for us. The work will only last for about 8 months and then it's finished. It might not be worthwhile moving up here for so short a time. So let's see what the other one's like." And we set off for Loch Ness. My first glimpse of the famous lake was blurred by rain as it poured relentlessly down, spattering onto the car. We had to drive right round to the other side, away from the hotels and guest houses that would accommodate the masses of visitors to the place in summer. Signs, all saying closed, swiveled and swung from their hinges as we passed one darkened building after another. Wind-swept lawns were bare of outdoor furniture, apart from a massive bright blue concrete Nessie, the monster, which undulated in one front garden, the loops of what I suspect were glossy, blue-painted tractor tires cut in half and planted upright to mimic hooped coils which shone in the wet, and big square white teeth gleamed bravely through its broad red lipstick smile. I laughed and pointed it out to Fred. He chuckled and said, "I just love the lengths the locals go to entice tourists. The ploys they use are entertaining enough on their own. Do you know that there are search parties that go on all year round? Scientists with state-of-the-art underwater detecting equipment spend millions trying to find the wee beastie." I was fascinated by the whole idea. "Wouldn't it be a pity if they did find a monster?" I asked, "especially if it didn't look at all like that one on the lawn." Our destination was a lonely building situated on the road that ran along the further shore of the loch and about as far away from the village as it was possible to be. A single light shone from an office at ground floor level. Fred parked the car under some streets which grew at a 45-degree angle to the ground, a stark indication of the prevailing wind direction. Wind flattened and sodden brown bracken lay against the sloping bank, interspersed by the darker green of wet heather and shiny grey boulders. Leaden clouds hung just above the surrounding hilltops, and the air had a misty, white, chilled atmosphere, alleviated now and again by flurries of raindrops hammering onto the car roof and side windows, driven down at a slanted angle by the strong wind. "I'll stay in the car," I said. "I'll put the heater on now and again, and I brought my book just in case." But instead of reading, I gazed out at the loch. We were positioned at a narrow part, and the opposite shore appeared quite close. There were fairly substantial waves whipping up the length of it. I'd read that the waters get quite rough out on Loch Ness, causing my earpiece fell out. Causing boats to heave and toss, and naturally people saw all kinds of moving creatures. I stared at the waves, trying to imagine a sleek, black, wet head emerging, followed by the humped back so beloved of cartoonists everywhere. But to my private disappointment, even my fertile imagination couldn't conjure up anything that looked remotely like a monster. However much I squinted, not even a stray log could be turned into Nessie. Fred arrived back at the car half an hour later and climbed in, shivering. "What was it like?" I asked. "I don't think it's going to suit us," he said. "Just look around. It's over 3 miles to the nearest dwelling, and there's nowhere to rent all year round. Just a couple of lodges might let out a few rooms at this time of the year, but come spring and right through the summer months, they'll be chock-a-block and we'll have to move out or pay top tourist rates. I gather that there's not a single bed to be found here or anywhere in the surrounding area for love nor money during the tourist season. These canny Scots will rent out their chicken sheds to tourists for good money once their homes are full." We drove optimistically back to the village of Loch Ness to see whether we could find somewhere to eat, but the entire place appeared to be deserted. So we opted for a quick bite of lunch at the same cafe in Fort William before our long drive back to Oban. It was getting dark as we left, and try as hard as we might, Fred pushing the rover to its limits on the narrow roads in the wind-swept gloom, we missed the ferry by 5 minutes and had to take the long way round, adding another half-hour to our homeward journey. I felt completely disheartened and exhausted. My back ached from sitting in the car all day, and in spite of my sheepskin-lined boots and the car heater being on full blast, my feet felt like lumps of ice. I slumped despondently in the corner of the dark car interior, saying very little, but heartsick at the thought of our wonderful plans evaporating before they even got off the ground. The drive home seemed to take forever now, without the sense of excitement and anticipation that had spurred us forward and up into the heart of Inverness. Let's not worry too much about the lack of jobs with accommodation nearby in these parts, reassured Fred. Tomorrow I'll try ringing sites a bit further down south of Oban, where there's more civilization and better prospects altogether. To my joy, 3 days later, Fred came back from the phone smiling. There's something coming up in Stirling that looks quite promising. It's quite a big town, and there'll be plenty of places to rent or even buy in the suburbs. Even some of the surrounding villages look like perfect places for us to live. The construction job outside Stirling was perfect. It would take at least 3 years to complete, and Fred was to be the supervising civil engineer throughout the project. All we needed now was to find somewhere to live. An obliging estate agent based in Stirling took us first to a small cabin situated in the middle of a forest. Apparently, it had been used as a set during the filming of Taka the Otter, which had been released a year or so earlier. It was not much bigger than a woodcutter's cabin and very pretty. A clear stream with golden pebbles speckling its bed and mossy, fern-lined banks flowed alongside one wall and away into the depths of the green forest. Enchanting as it was, and I could picture Hansel and Gretel leaving their trail of bread crumbs towards it. It was far too remote and lonely for me to spend my days alone with our baby. The access road, too, was a rutted, muddy track which wound its way between the trees to reach the tarmac road. We were shown another cottage, this time in a tiny village which looked perfect. It was very like the croft we'd looked at Glencruton, but the price was outrageous. Why are the owners asking so much for what's basically a small cottage in a tiny garden on the edge of a village? Well, nothing more than a hamlet, really, inquired Fred. There's a property boom in this part of Scotland right now. It's half an hour's drive and easily within commuter reach of Glasgow. People even work in Edinburgh from here. Everybody's looking for smaller properties these days as they're easier to clean and maintain. There are lots of young couples like yourselves wanting a first home. Prices have shot up accordingly, and places like this are going for a premium, explained the agent. But I have something in Callander, Perthshire, which might interest you. It's well within your price range. Shall we take a look at it? Callander is a small town called the Gateway to the Trossachs, a sort of Highland version of the picturesque Lake District, and the location in which Dr. Finlay's Casebook, a long-running soap opera on Scottish television, was filmed, and half an hour away from Stirling. I liked it immediately, as most of the houses along the main street were built in an attractive, mellow, honey-coloured stone, rather like the walls surrounding Glencruton's kitchen garden. There were the ubiquitous granite buildings as well, but they seemed less grey and had wonderfully decorated, carved exteriors. There were plenty of whitewashed, some pink and pale yellow cottages snuggled among the bigger buildings, especially on the narrow streets that led down to the river. The whole place had a lovely tranquil feel to it, and to add to its appeal, a sparkling, clear, fast-running river called the Leni, which consisted, I think, mostly of icy snow melt water from the forest-clad hills that surrounded the valley, flowed appealingly through the town. The house we were on our way to view was situated on the edge of Callander, on the road to Kilmahog. I just loved that name. A tiny village in the centre of which was a woolen mill that wove tartans and red-bubbled tam-o'-shanters of every description, among all the other accoutrements necessary for Highlanders to wear for warmth and tourists to take home as souvenirs. The agent turned into a crescent called Lenny Fuse, and then almost immediately through a wide gateway with a green wooden gate, and parked under a massive beech tree which grew in the centre of a circular gravel driveway. I gasped. The house was enormous, double-story and built from stone. It had big bay windows overlooking half an acre of garden. There were so many rooms, all large and spacious, that I looked at it in dismay. We would rattle about however much we tried to spread ourselves out. There were almost identical houses on either side, one of which had been turned into a substantially sized B&B, now closed, of course, until the tourist season began. According to our estate agent, that particular street, Lenny Fuse, a long crescent which looped off the main road, the A84 leading north out of Callander and eventually to Oban via Crianlarich, rejoining it about a mile further up at the very end of the town, was flanked by houses built by well-to-do merchants and businessmen in the late 18th and 19th centuries, when all of a similar size, well able to house substantially large families and their staff. The house was in good condition, with fairly new carpets and wallpaper, and best of all, it had central heating as well as several fireplaces. "It's far too big," I said after we walked around, our footsteps echoing in the empty rooms. There were outbuildings too. Stables with two large loose boxes were attached to a big coach house, which had steps leading up to a hayloft, partitioned off to create a small room where a groom would have slept. There were still dusty old wisps of hay lying in the mangers, and an old leather halter hung from a hook beside one of the stable doors. Saddle and harness racks were attached to the stone walls too, and in spite of the cobwebs and hay dust, they looked as if they'd only recently been cleared. Planning permission has been approved for alterations to the stables and coach house, allowing them to be converted into a separate dwelling like a granny cottage, said the estate agent. You could let it out for a substantial rent and pay off your mortgage if you so wished. The whole place is going for a good price, though, added Fred. What's the catch? Nothing, replied the agent. The owner, an elderly lady, recently widowed, wants to move to live near her daughter in Edinburgh and wants to sell as quickly as possible. She no longer lives here because of all the fond memories this place holds for her when her husband was alive, and she needs money to buy a small place for herself. As I said before, small houses have become popular and nobody wants to buy the big places anymore. I can see why. Well, we'll give it some thought, said Fred. In the meantime, we'll spend the night at that hotel we saw in town. If anything else comes up, could you contact us there? I don't see much point in driving all the way back to Oban until we've seen everything that's available in this area. The hotel was also closed, but the proprietor who lived on the premises agreed to let us have a room for the night. You can get breakfast at that wee cafe down the road, as I've closed the kitchen for the winter, he explained. That is all for the time being, and there's more to come next week. I would like to thank John Moslane for putting aside his Friday afternoons to help me produce these videos. Without him, I could not do this. I would also like to thank Sean van Vuren for his sterling work in uploading my videos to my YouTube channel, adding the photos, as well as managing my channel so professionally. If you would like to know more about my other works, I have written 5 books in all, and each one is autobiographical. Please visit my website at www.whitezulubook.com, where you will find a lot more information as well as plenty of photographs. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my life story, and there is plenty more to come. A thumbnail photo will be attached each week, and thank you so much for all your support and all the very kind remarks you make in complimenting me on my work. I really appreciate it. Goodbye.